The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. We'll begin starting in just a minute or two. We're going to give a few more minutes for people to join the webinar. Thank you so much for being here today. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we are going to get started as it is noon, and we're looking forward to having a few more people joining us for this presentation. We're really excited to discuss a very important topic today, how to best advocate for survivors of trauma. This webinar is part of a regular series hosted by the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, which is the largest statewide pro bono legal service provider that connects low-income Marylanders with free civil legal services. This is presented by the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, which is a partnership between University of Baltimore School of Law and MVLS. This project represents survivors of sex trafficking that are seeking to vacate or set aside their prostitution convictions, as well as provide representation to survivors and other populations at risk of future exploitation in expungement and shielding cases. MVLS also provides HTPP clients with access to civil legal services to address other critical issues like family law, housing, consumer debt, tax, and other legal matters. So my name is Heather Heiman, and I'm very excited to have with us Jessica Emerson, who is a professor at University of Baltimore Law School. Jessica is the director of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, and as you can see, she is also a master of social work. So we're very excited to be able to draw from her, I believe, over a decade of social work and counseling experience.
Makes me feel old, but yes.
As well as years of legal advocacy. My experience is also grounded in advocating for survivors of gender-based trauma, so hopefully we can bring some interesting perspectives to the discussion today. Our commentary is going to be based on the work that we do with the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, supporting trafficking survivors, but of course the recommendations that we make during this talk can apply to any survivor of trauma. And our contact information is at the end of the webinar. So our agenda today, we have basically two parts we want to cover. First, we're going to be providing an overview of trauma 101, if you will, looking at definitions, causation, the effects, and the biological responses. And I'll be handing that off to Jessica to cover. And then we both will be discussing strategies for trauma-informed legal advocacy and how you can incorporate some tips and suggestions into your own practice to be able to better support clients. So first, let's take a look at understanding and recognizing how trauma impacts certain clients that we work with.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. Again, thanks to MVLS for hosting this webinar and for inviting me to participate. Again, my name is Jessica Emerson. I'm the director of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, and I run a clinical law program at the University of Baltimore School of Law. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is what is trauma? There are a couple of definitions, two of which are probably more familiar to you than others, but one that I want to highlight just to kind of give you a broader version of the term. So the first definition of trauma is a serious injury or shock to the body, as from a violence or an accident. So if you've ever watched a medical drama, they say trauma to the abdomen. That doesn't mean that your abdomen had a bad breakup. What that means is that there was damage to it, and like the definition says, from violence or an accident. The next two definitions are probably more common in terms of what you would think about, in terms of an emotional wound or a shock that creates substantial lasting damage to psychological development. Now that tends to be more of kind of the individual trauma that folks can suffer. But the third and final definition that we want to highlight for you is an event or situation that causes great distress and disruption. So if you think of things like the recent spate of hurricanes, 9/11, those are things that, folks didn't have to actually be impacted by individually, but collectively, this was something that traumatized a large group of people. All right, so what causes trauma? The most obvious examples are going to be exposure to violence, including physical abuse, sexual assault, exposure to accidents, natural disasters. In the context of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, we're talking about human trafficking fitting under that definition. But what I like to challenge people to think about is what else can cause trauma, and kind of thinking bigger and more systemically. And when you think outside of the individual traumas that folks can suffer, we arrive at things like discrimination based on internal characteristics. So racism, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, those things, discrimination that people experience on behalf of who they are, can be incredibly traumatizing. Living in or in proximity to poverty, the systemic damage that is done by systems that interact with impoverished people can cause trauma. And also including systemic neglect or betrayal. And the example I like to use is, a young person put into foster care because mom and dad were using drugs, and they're cycled from foster home to foster home. They experience chronic abuse in each of the foster homes. That individual or that young person is going to be traumatized by the failure of the very system that was set in place to keep them safe and to help them in failing to do so. So trauma is bigger than just the individual experiences. It also can be caused by the systems that people find themselves, frankly, stuck in. Now, just a little warning to all of us, this includes exposure to the criminal legal system, including attorneys. Now, that doesn't mean that we are inherently traumatizing. What it means is that we can be. And it's really important as attorneys to understand that we fit into a system that can cause people harm. And if we're not aware of that, if we are not in tune to that or in tune with that, we can unfortunately perpetuate those types of challenges.
Just to chime in, one of the experiences that I've had too in my past practice was where there were community experiences of violence. Perhaps a survivor hadn't experienced violence themselves, but they'd constantly seen violence throughout the community or received constant threats of violence if they behaved in a way that defied community norms. And this can also lead to a trauma reaction. I'd also like to just note quickly too, we are live on GoToWebinar. You should have a box at the side of your screen that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please, we would encourage you to type them in, and we will be watching to see if there's any questions that we can answer throughout the presentation.
Excellent. Right. Okay. Let's keep going on our trauma journey. Some common reactions to trauma: shock, anger, nervousness, fear, guilt, anxiety, inability to concentrate. These are all really normal, typical reactions to trauma. Now, what should happen is that the symptoms should reduce over time. They should be more intense, closer to the time of the traumatic event, and they should dissipate, in the weeks following. Now, I always kind of preface this particular bullet point in saying that I don't do this training to say that all of you should become social workers, but you want to have the framework to understand your client's reactions, understand your client's experiences. And so this is just kind of the clinical marker that we use, which is that if symptoms don't reduce 1 month after the traumatic event, this may indicate that someone has developed something called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. All right, we're going to take a closer look at just a few of the symptoms. that of PTSD that attorneys working with clients who have survived trauma might experience. Or might show in their work with the attorney. I'm not going to go through a ton of these. I want to point out a few specific ones. In the middle section, you'll see a term that's called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is what trauma is expected to look like. It is someone who is easily startled. It is someone who becomes teary, and might cry hysterically in reaction to a traumatic event. Jumpy, shaky, things like that. That is what hypervigilance looks like. It's basically someone who is always on the perpetual edge of being scared or traumatized. I want to kind of counteract or contrast that with the top box that says lack of emotion or flat affect. The clinical term for this is actually hypoarousal, and I like to kind of highlight the two of them because of what they mean in the context of lawyering. But first, let's talk about what hypoarousal or flat affect looks like. The easiest way to explain this is that this is somebody who is perhaps discussing a traumatic event that you would expect to get upset about or show some kind of emotion about, and it just doesn't exist. The way that I teach my students this is someone who is talking about a traumatic experience in the same way that you would tell somebody what toppings you wanted on your pizza. Like, there's just nothing there. And it's not that someone isn't traumatized. In fact, I would say that in my experience, more trauma survivors look like they are hypo-aroused rather than hypervigilant. And these individuals, unfortunately, tend to be less believable. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they don't look the way that we expect trauma survivors to look. I mean, how many times have we, seen the Law and Orders where someone just didn't have the right affect and they weren't believed. It wasn't believed that they went through the trauma that they went through. So it's really important to understand that flat affect or a lack of emotion when talking about things that are really upsetting should be a call to you to say, wow, this is probably someone who's experienced significant amounts of trauma. And in the context of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, helping attorneys understand the difference between some of these kind of symptoms of trauma can help the attorney act as the quote unquote interpreter in the work to help explain the individual's behavior.
And that can be so critical when working with law enforcement, even other advocates, let alone in the court system. It's a critical point to keep in mind as you're working with a client.
Yeah. The other one that I want to highlight, and this is just because I put my social work hat on, self-medicating behaviors at the bottom. We could have easily listed drug abuse, addiction, things like that. I like to call it self-medicating behavior because it's important to me to help reframe the conversation around people who are using substance. I tell my students there is a reason that we have a drug and alcohol problem in this country. It is because it works. And it doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. There are significant consequences, both interpersonal and legal. But the reality is that if an individual has not been taught or does not have access to additional ways to cope with things that are upsetting in their lives, drugs and alcohol are always going to be there. And, we really are finally starting to reframe it in terms of some of the harm reduction work that's being done. But there is still the stigma that if someone is using drugs and alcohol, they're weak, they have no willpower, things like that. And I think it's really important as advocates working with anyone who has survived trauma to start to reframe that and challenge that, frankly, untruth, and help people understand that, okay, this is a sign that someone is struggling and a sign that we need to teach this person different ways to cope. And in fact, simply saying that to a client who's experienced trauma is an incredible way to show that you are present with them and that you're not judging them and saying, you know what, I hear you, I see you, and I understand the use, what the use of this substance actually means. And to me, that shows that you found a way to get up every single day and cope with these horrible things that you've told us. And wow, if we could just harness that strength in another way.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, and this is, I think, particularly complicated by survivors' often lack of access to medical assistance, too, and to healthcare. So it's something that we as attorneys can be advocates for reframing that issue.
Great. All right. So we've talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, but just the term post-traumatic stress disorder indicates that the stressor has stopped. So it's really essential for us to consider, what if there's nothing post about a client's post-traumatic stress disorder? By indicating that that somebody has post-traumatic stress disorder, it indicates that the trauma has stopped. And in the lives of a lot of our clients, especially in the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, the trauma is constant, near constant, and chronic. And the reaction to trauma of that variety can look quite different. So there's a term that was not invented, that was that is now used, called complex trauma. And this is in recognition of the fact that trauma occurs along a continuum from singular, someone who is relatively stable, who has supports, who gets in a really bad accident, but has the health insurance they need and maybe the counseling that they need to deal with their fears that have come along with this car accident. Contrast that with, I'm thinking of a client I was recently in court with, who was born to, unfortunately, an absent father, a mother who was using substance to cope with her own history of abuse and neglect. She was in and out of foster care year after year. She was homeless on the street by age 13, trading sex for survival in her early teens, then went on to be trafficked as an adult. And so we're talking about an experience where the trauma never really ends, and so there's no post to get over, to move towards. So it's really important to understand that trauma occurs along a continuum, and that complex trauma, or the symptoms of complex trauma that we're going to talk about in a minute, result from the other end of that continuum, so that extended exposure, chronic exposure to trauma. Complex trauma is definitely associated with an increase in the symptoms that we talked about previously, but also in the type of symptoms. And so what you might see is something like inability to regulate emotions, or someone who's self-destructive. That looks like, the way I teach it to my students, is someone who can't get out of their own way, right? Who, if there is a pothole, metaphorical pothole to fall in, they will, right? Amnesia, people who have significant challenges with memory, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides as well. People who dissociate, or whose kind of reality shuts off, or whose brain shuts themselves off from reality, and they go into what's called a dissociative state. We see chronic guilt, we see intense shame, we see trauma bonding, which, if you're familiar with Stockholm Syndrome, it is basically a survival instinct where an individual recognizes in a perpetrator that perpetrator holds their lives, the perpetrator holds his or her life in their hands. And so what the individual does in order to stay alive is bonds with that individual and tries to make sure that the perpetrator stays as calm and happy and sunny as possible, because that increases the likelihood that they will stay alive. And this comes up a lot in the context of human trafficking, because folks that do the work sometimes at the beginning don't understand why a survivor isn't skipping into the arms of a law enforcement officer or a counselor. And the fact is that trauma bonding explains this, and trauma bonding requires a lot of undoing. And so understanding that the trauma survivor might have an allegiance to the perpetrator, is rooted in trauma, can really help you understand the behavior of your client. It also looks like complex trauma also looks like intense difficulties with trust and with intimacy. And again, that attempt at self-medication. And so kind of to refer back to what we said as well, an increase in the symptoms that we talked about, as well as in type, you can see under the symptoms of complex trauma, it's less kind of psychological symptoms and more characterological behavior. And so that's always the key to me, is that if I'm not necessarily, I know that all this stuff has happened, but I'm not seeing the depression, I'm not seeing the anxiety, I might see that self-medication, but what I'm really seeing is somebody whose personality and character is getting them into a lot of unsavory situations. That's my key, that this might be complex trauma as opposed to just typical PTSD.
Okay. And I think we've seen this in the context too of doing work in the family violence and domestic violence realm as well.
Absolutely.
A lot of these different symptoms are also going to transfer across to those types of situations as well. And you might see the same thing if you're working with a client that's experienced that type of trauma or abuse.
I mean, I'm thinking, family violence, I'm thinking child abuse cases, right? All of those things where someone is intensely attached to the person who's harmed them. And then those side effects continue to define the relationships and the situations in the person's life.
Yeah,
that is what complex trauma looks like.
And it spreads forward to future relationships, and it can be frustrating, I think, sometimes for advocates who might not understand why this is happening, or be able to relate in the way they might expect to with the client they're working with.
And that's why I think training like this is so important, because it's not only, I mentioned before that it's, and you and I talked about before, that it's really important for the advocate to be able to interpret within the court system. But I think what you're saying is highlighting the fact that this is going to help me interpret my reaction to a client.
It's
all
all
if I'm
about,
understanding correctly.
I think so, yeah. I think that having this deeper understanding is going to be able to inform and create a more productive and hopefully in the long term more trusting relationship with your client, because you're going to understand where behaviors are coming from. You're going to understand different ways of clients reacting with a little bit more depth and clarity. And we'll go into that a little bit further with the second part of the training.
Right. Now, we don't have time to talk, to actually play this video, but we wanted to bring this to your attention because this is, although a little hokey at the beginning and a little bit kind of unresponsive, I guess, to some of the stuff that we see in the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, this video really does a great job of highlighting with these great illustrations how chronic stress, and we're talking about complex trauma, how it affects your brain and how it affects your genes, and how those changes in your brain and in your genes can actually get passed down from generation to generation. But it also talks about how we heal. And I think that we wanted to make sure that you could see that this is a TEDx talk. It's called How Chronic Stress Affects Your Brain. And if you are interested in further learning, I think this is it's like a 3+ minute video, maybe 4 minutes. And it really just does a good job of linking all of this together. So we wanted to make sure that you have that information. All right. So we're going to talk very briefly about the biology of trauma. I usually nerd out on this for several slides, but I have been controlled today. But I
still have some good graphics.
We do still have some good nerdery
to show you.
Yes, exactly. So the biology of trauma, we have already talked about the fact that trauma has emotional, psychological, and behavioral impacts. We want to talk a little bit about the fact that trauma has neurobiological impacts, okay? And that means changing, it affects the way the brain works, okay? There's our little PTSD brain. So this includes the ability to process and regulate emotions. This is actually linked with a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center. Again, it's one of the things that has been with us since our creation as human beings. And it allows us to act without thinking in times of emergency. I always kind of picture them like, so when I walk out of the cave, I see a woolly mammoth. I don't really have time to kind of sit there and think about whether the woolly mammoth is going to eat me. I just have to recognize that and react and get back into my cave. That's your woolly mammoth detector. But the problem is that when trauma can impact the amygdala to the point that the amygdala swells and it becomes bigger than it normally should be. And the after effect is that the person senses danger where there is none. And so they see woolly mammoths where there are none. And so they may engage in preemptive violence in order to control for danger that doesn't exist, but their brain can't tell them that, right?
It's like a fight or flight reaction in overdrive,
exactly.
basically.
It is exactly that. Yep, fight or flight reaction, inappropriate fight or flight reaction. And so folks that, chronically fighting or struggling with emotions, that may be because their amygdala has swollen to the point that it is dictating their behavior. It also impacts our ability to associate consequences with actions. It impacts our ability to problem solve. That's linked with a part of the brain called the corpus callosum, and that is a line that exists between the left and right hemisphere of the brain and allows the messages from the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere to meet and interact. And so, for instance, if I am having trouble using my words to express that I'm upset, right? So the creativity that's needed for that and the words and the brain function that's needed to take those words and use those words to solve a problem, then I might turn to using my fists, right? Because trauma damages the corpus callosum. It also impacts our ability to experience empathy as well as to experience typical memory function. So like I said, I usually have several slides on this. I have been redirected so that we're going to focus on memory in particular, because this is one of the most important things when you're talking about lawyering, okay? So the area of the brain that trauma damages that relates to memory is something called the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that's responsible for memory, storage, and retrieval. So what's really important to understand is that traumatized brains may not process or store memories in the same way as non-traumatized brains. Again, using this in the context of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project work, if we are seeking to address a conviction that someone had at the time that they were being trafficked, we put together, an affidavit that basically tells the story of the client's trafficking. And we run into challenges with trauma and memory in this situation a lot, because folks have not stored their memories in quite the same way that, maybe I would have, since I have not had that experience. So what we want to do, Heather's going to give you some best practice tips on how to handle this, because this is definitely one that we want to zoom in on.
And we'll have more best practice tips later, but we thought it was important to have this kind of in the same slide as we're talking about memory. So you have to remember that survivors, they may not be telling their stories in a linear fashion. Sometimes in the past, when I've been working with someone who is highly traumatized, I almost didn't even write things down in a linear fashion. I put incidences down as spokes on a wheel so that we could just get everything down, let the survivor talk as it was comfortable for them and lead the conversation, and then turn back later to trying to sort things out in a more linear fashion. And there's ways that you can do this too. You can look through records or documents, IDs that the survivor is able to provide to try to find some orienting dates or find some particular events that might help organize memories. What happened before X or after Y? And then you can begin to build a timeline for an affidavit or for the narrative that you need to construct with the survivor. You could also look through court appearances, police reports. There's a lot of things that we can look at, that we can research as attorneys, that'll help craft the survivor's story and help them get organized.
One of my students, I think a couple of semesters ago, were working with a survivor to craft an affidavit. They used Maryland Judiciary Case Search, because she had like 20 arrests, but there were different times during that period of time where she was listed as living at different addresses. And she was able to use those as orienting structures to fill in the narrative.
I just did that recently with a client, where even noting this happened in this city, this happened in this county, and we were able to kind of trace a path based on some of those court records. And again, if conflicting info is presented, this is just a time to try to, again, be in touch with your own reactions and not get frustrated. It's really important to frame this in a positive way for the survivor, to address the need to sort through memories and to sort through conflicting information as a way of sorting out the facts. We definitely don't want survivors or our clients to be thinking that we think they're lying, because that's going to impact your relationship as an attorney, and it's going to make it challenging to go forward working with the client.
And that's why understanding this is so important, because then, if you're prepared for the fact that this person may not tell their story in a linear fashion,
Mhm.
you're not going to react the same way as you would if you did think that.
Exactly. And I think particularly if you don't have experience working in your regular practice with survivors of trauma, as in Jessica and I do more day in and day out, it's just something important to keep in mind, because we do have gut reactions about people who we believe and who we don't believe, and we don't want that to impede our ability to assist someone who really needs help. So next we have a very interesting slide that I'll let Jessica discuss a little further.
So we use this just to kind of highlight that until a couple of years ago, all the things that we just discussed were theoretical. And we thought that based on the fact that memory was challenging for folks who had survived trauma, that it would impact their hippocampus, because we know the hippocampus stores memories. But what we can do now is we can show it. And if you take a look at the left brain, you'll see there's a lot more colors going on than on the left brain. But there's also in the front, there's a lot of red, there's purple, there's smaller dark pockets in the middle of the brain, a lot of greens, a lot of yellows. And then if you take a look at the brain on the right, you're going to see that in that frontal lobe, there is a lot more green than red, so it's a lot less vibrant. If you move down the brain towards the middle, there are big pockets of just emptiness, especially in the area of the temporal lobe, so people orienting them to time, person, and place. And the left brain, as I'm sure you could probably anticipate, is a PET scan of a healthy brain of a child who has not experienced what the child on the right has experienced, which is extreme deprivation and neglect. And so what we learn from this and what we can use this for is to really make all of the stuff that we just talked about concrete for the finder of fact, for a prosecutor, for a defense attorney, to really help them understand that trauma changes the brain. Now, that does not mean that this is forever lost. All is not lost. With counseling and with support, the brain can learn how to refire its synapses in different areas. Now, it doesn't mean that someone who has experienced what the person on the right has experienced is going to have an easy road. They're not. But it's important to help people understand that, yes, this may be to blame for what's going on now, but we need to support this person going forward so that they can work to heal from what has developed. So this is something that you can use. I actually got this from a friend who used to put these in mitigation packets in criminal cases to explain, again, to show all of the stuff that we already talked about.
That's a really interesting strategy. I mean, again, it is physical evidence of what we've been talking about, that this isn't just a perceived change, this is an actual biological change to people's bodies that's coming as a result of trauma. And I think it could be a very powerful tool.
Great.
So what are common client reactions to trauma? This is a list of things that we would really like you, the attorney, to be on the lookout for when you're working with clients. And it'll help you know whether the person you're working with has experienced trauma and sometimes even how severe it is. So there can often be a return of or increase in active mental health symptoms. And what this means is symptoms of anxiety might come back, symptoms of depression might come back. There might be a flat effect, which Jessica's talked about a bit from the prior slide. And also, I'm going to try not to butcher this word, labile effect, which is actually the opposite. It's more of a roller coaster of emotions.
Up and down and up.
So you could see either of these two extremes when working with a client. And again, this is all just part of a common client reaction to the trauma that they've been exposed to. Some other more concrete ways that you might see trauma is highly emotional, hostile, or angry behavior towards you. A client might avoid appointments, avoid court dates. They also might be forgetful of important details or dates, again, when you're trying to construct a narrative. They also might have some negative behavior directed towards an attorney. I don't know if you have any examples that you've encountered of that, Jessica.
How long do you have?
I think we both worked with clients that have been challenging, and again, that's where we as attorneys can hopefully be the ones that are embodying patience and understanding and trying to give a number of chances to be able to work successfully with somebody. There's also sometimes significant distrust of law enforcement or service providers,
including lawyers.
Including lawyers, and people will sometimes react very hostily and not want to be cooperating, not want to even speak with somebody. And again, this can all be just part of that trauma reaction. It's nothing that, I think the major point we want to make is don't take offense or be put off by these behaviors. These are things that are common reaction. Don't take it personally. You can work through these types of reactions with your client and still build a productive relationship to let them get the legal assistance that they need.
One of the things I like to think about is that there must be a little bit of safety felt in my presence if someone is willing to open themselves up like this.
Exactly.
That's the reframe I use in my head.
And that's what I've experienced too in the past. It's not been like this cascade of negative reactions. There's been kind of a seesaw sometimes.
Yeah.
One day is very good, the next day or next call or next meeting could be very challenging. And so this is just a normal part of working with survivors of trauma. A final point that is also really important to keep in mind is that survivors might now just be experiencing a normalization of trauma and exploitation. And this can manifest itself in situations where, say, a client will not call the police. They might be incredulous that abusive behavior is something exceptional that should be addressed. They might be indifferent to continued exploitation. And this can, again, make it a little challenging to work with a client, but it's all part of that common reaction that we have to keep in mind.
And it's interesting to think about the fact that this normalization is actually a concrete symptom of PTSD. It's called a sense of a foreshortened future. I have so many times heard, well, it didn't matter what I did because I wasn't going to live past 21, right? And that is the normalization and the expectation of trauma and exploitation. That's a really concrete sign to you that this person is experiencing PTSD symptoms.
And it's interesting because I think sometimes there's been some confusion with that and like suicidal ideation where someone will say, you know, oh, I'm not going to live past next week anyways. And it's not that they're suicidal. It's that they're reacting to a trauma experience. And it can be really crucial, again, to hold this in your mind as something that a client might be dealing with. So not to go to the other extreme.
So if the previous slide was about what you might see with working with a traumatized person, we want to focus on the way that the world reacts to traumatized people. So the first thing you might see is somebody who is labeled as treatment resistant or difficult, right? I can't tell you how many in my social work days, how many referrals I got from providers where things, quote unquote, didn't work out. And the hallmark of the reason in their minds that things didn't work out was the person was treatment resistant or they were too difficult to be a client, right?
And we see that with circular referrals where people just cannot get help because they're struggling to even access those services, maybe because of their initial manner or interactions with service providers. And we want to try to nip that in the bud and stop it from happening.
Right. There's also assumptions made of somebody's truthfulness or of the, whether or not they'll reoffend. I mean, that is rampant throughout the criminal legal system, and it actually corresponds, the data tells us, with harsher punishments or sentences. I like to think about, in the instance where someone has committed an offense against someone and perhaps a judge or a jury wants to see remorse, right? But if I am so beaten down internally by trauma that I am hypo-aroused and my body just can't put up with feeling anything anymore, and so I feel nothing, what if I physically cannot show that I am remorseful, even if I feel remorse inside, or I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, but I can't feel, or at least I can't emote what you want from me. The data tells us that these individuals get harsher punishments or sentences. So this shows that, the knowledge that's gained in webinars like this needs to reach far more than just, civil legal providers, for instance.
We need to be educating judges and state's attorneys and
yes, we do.
So many people about these types of things.
And then again, just kind of putting my social work hat on, common reactions to traumatized people, they're seen only as a collection of symptoms rather than a person who's struggling and is doing the very best they can with what they have. And that is a very powerful reframe, as I've said.
And I think that's one of the underlying major points of this training today is try to meet the client where they are at. Understand where they're at, take the time to do that, and then
be there with them.
Be there with them and work with them from the point that they're currently in their recovery or their steps forward.
Right.
And on this note, we are now going to turn to the second part of our training, which is digging in a little bit deeper to strategies for trauma-informed legal advocacy. There's a lot to talk about, but I think we're doing very good with time and should keep it to this hour that we planned. So what does being trauma-informed mean? Being trauma-informed, it means a lot of things, but I think you can break it down to a good crystallization of what you should be asking yourself. Are you asking what happened to this client, or are you asking what is wrong with this client? And if you're asking what happened to this client, you are trying to reach that, I think, deeper level of understanding that's going to let you build a really good relationship. Mm-hmm. And this trauma-informed model, it really rests on recognition of certain characteristics that are intrinsic into all positive human relationships. Mm-hmm. And those things are empathy, responsive listening, having a restraint from judgment, and really demonstrating authentic care and concern towards your client. It's also really important, I think Jessica spoke on this quite a bit during the first part of the presentation, just understanding where self-destructive behaviors might be coming from and how they're really an attempt to cope with past trauma rather than something that's wrong with your client or mm-hmm. something that's a negative behavior that needs to be dealt with. It might just be something they need to cope with the place that they're in right mm-hmm. now. And this paradigm shift, looking at something from the perspective of being trauma-informed, it doesn't imply that there's a lack of responsibility for illegal behavior, but it does provide us with an opportunity to apply approaches that are the most effective in promoting recovery and reducing recidivism. Recidivism. That was funny. Yeah. I have my two tough words for the presentation.
And this one, I like to think about. I do this presentation, or I have done this presentation with law enforcement folks, mm-hmm. and I added this because I kind of got to this place, mm-hmm. and understandably, people were asking, well, are you just saying we should open up the jails and mm-hmm. no one's responsible? Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, and I said exactly what you just said. No, this is about thinking about what justice would look like.
Exactly.
If we focused on an explanation. What would rehabilitation, what would prisons look like? If we focused on the explanation, we really could transform the system from, frankly, quite draconian as it stands now, into something that could affect justice for everyone mm-hmm. involved. And so it is really, that paradigm shift really is important.
Mm-hmm. And the punitive approach is generally not going to be helpful to traumatized clients. That's where we need to be having a greater understanding of what they're going through and a greater a reorientation to support.
Yeah. I would take a step forward and say it is not helpful.
Yes, definitely. So what are the basic elements of trauma-informed lawyering? Just a quick note, we do have a one-pager, a tip sheet that's available in the handouts for this webinar, along with a PDF of the entire presentation. But that tip sheet does go into some more detail about what I'm talking about here, and it's a great thing if you want to post it on your bulletin board, put it on your desk. It's a good quick guide to, again, trying to provide the most supportive service you can to your clients.
My students have it up.
Oh,
not
great.
Not as nice as it is, but they have my more rudimentary version.
Wonderful.
Up in their cubes.
So the first element is that of transparency. And what this means is really being fully transparent about the client's legal needs and to do so in easy to understand language. If you're transparent with your client about what the process is going to be, what you expect from them, what you'll be providing, that's really going to promote trust in your relationship, and it's going to minimize the client's feeling of powerlessness,
which is the opposite of trauma.
Exactly. You are actively helping to work against the trauma that they have experienced. It's also going to distinguish you from past negative relationships where things weren't transparent, where there was manipulation and abuse. So this is a critical part of this type of advocacy. Next is predictability. And I know As attorneys, we are all very, very busy. I am, you are. We have so many pressing needs. We have so much we have to stay on top of. But if you can just try to make an extra effort, if you're working with a client who's a survivor of trauma, to inform the client about what's coming, both in terms of individual meetings and calls, as well as their larger legal picture, it's really going to contribute to their feeling of safety and help decrease anxiety, because they're going to have a roadmap for what's ahead. And that predictability is something, again, that they've likely been lacking throughout their life experience. So the third part is client control. And what this refers to is the need to give clients a voice in decisions that affect them. This is also called client-centered practice. There's lots of names for this, in a way that's really purposeful and that exceeds your ethical requirements. Again, do everything you can to give agency to and empower a traumatized client. It's going to help strengthen their own abilities, improve their confidence, and improve their relationship with you as an attorney. It's going to validate their strengths. And it's really going to help, I think, to develop decision-making skills, and it'll counteract that feeling of helplessness that they might have been grappling with in the past. Another element that's really crucial is reliability. Again, as much as we can, please try to always follow through on your responsibilities, your commitments, your appointments. If you say you're going to call, please try to make that call. If something needs to get put off, please let the client know. Give some kind of roadmap as best you can so that they know what's coming down the road for them, and they can be ready and be able to better anticipate any unexpected changes or cancellations or shifts that might occur while you're representing them. And this is really crucial because clients that have experienced trauma, they have experienced a lot of disappointment, and you can counteract this. Another element that's really important is to engage in proactive support. You as an attorney can really try to anticipate issues that might be distressing or destabilizing. What are you going to be talking about today during this meeting? Is this going to potentially be very challenging for a client to visit or to revisit? Try to anticipate those times, and if you can, be as familiar as possible with support services in your area, mental health providers, social workers, other agencies, so that you can refer if you need to. And here with the Human Trafficking Prevention Program, both Jessica and I are happy to be those referral points to assist with any clients that you might be working with.
And just one of the things, like a little practice tip that I like to use is I build into the time that I work with my client to say, when we might be discussing some things that might be upsetting or, unsettling in some way, when you are upset, who do you go to? What do you do? Let's make a plan in advance so that if you are upset at the end of this particular session, we have a plan on how to deal with that. With more established clients, if they have like a therapist that they see, you can make sure that they schedule that appointment before or after they meet with you. Very concrete things that you can do that don't take much time at all, and you are doing such a great job at being proactively supportive of your clients.
It's almost like a mini safety plan. I've done so much safety planning with clients, but this is like a mini safety plan for these when you're revisiting traumatic experiences, so they're ready to leave your office and not have a breakdown in the hallway or a worse experience. So the final element I want to just briefly touch on is patience. This is pretty self-explanatory, but again, it can take time to build connections with a client, especially one that's experienced trauma. And if you can remain patient, present, and available, even when things are getting stressful, it's really going to help your relationship with that individual that you're working with. So we're going to turn now to talking about triggers. And triggers are reminders of a traumatic incident that causes a person to re-experience some aspect of that incident as if it was happening in the present time. These can be caused by a lot of different things, by sounds, smells, people, including attorneys or police officers. Even specific words and phrases might trigger a client and cause a reaction. So what can we do to help anticipate triggers when we're working with a client? There's a number of things that we wanted to just think of some practical tips that you might be able to use in your own practice. One of the things is just to offer options when you're meeting with somebody in the physical space. One of my biggest ones, and I know this is one for Jessica too, don't block the door. Sit in a way so that your client doesn't feel cut off or trapped, so they can easily get up and leave the room if they need to. It's also important to be sensitive to the who and why people are in the room when you're working with a client. Is this really the best time for an intern or someone else to be present when you're talking about really some traumatizing event from the client's past? It's also great if you can offer something comforting to help the client get through this experience of talking about their traumatic event. And that can be something as simple as a stress ball, Play-Doh. I have this, Jessica's this fidgety star thing.
Yes, I call it the fidget bowl.
Yes.
It's all kinds of these things. And I literally plop them down on the table. I don't even really make note of them because clients are going to be like, what is that? And they're going to grab for stuff.
Exactly.
And it's really helpful. It's almost, it's as simple as saying it's going to probably be easier for me to talk about X if I'm staring at the stress ball than having to stare you dead in the eye.
Exactly. And it just, we all like to fidget with our hands. And it becomes even more important when you're dealing with a traumatic memory or experience that you have to share. Another great thing you can do is just explain things as much as possible in advance. Does the client know what to expect when they come in today? Will they be answering questions, meeting with other people, reviewing and signing documents? Again, giving back that sense of control is a crucial thing you can do to help your relationship and to help facilitate your legal services.
And I hope you're seeing that these suggestions correspond directly to those basic elements of trauma-informed lawyering that we talked about, right? Proactive support, putting making sure I have my tissues in my fidget ball, predictability, giving the client a roadmap in advance. Like these things, the suggestions that we're giving you go directly back to those basic elements of trauma-informed lawyering.
Exactly. It's also really important to think about, I think we touched on this a little bit, think about what to do if the client is triggered, and to have a plan in place beforehand. You can definitely offer breaks, and I actually want to say, don't just offer them. I would just have a break. You can proactively take a break as the attorney, giving the client a chance to not even have to ask for it.
Right.
And my general rule is I don't go more than 30 minutes without kind of doing a pause of some kind, checking in, bathroom break, water, something to give the client a chance to breathe when you're going through issue.
And we're going to talk more about this, but the client may not be the only one who needs a break.
Exactly. You need to be keeping in mind your own self-care as well as the situation that your client's in. And then for the last 2 points, just think about your body. Think about your stance, how you're sitting. How are you presenting yourself? Are you across the desk kind of in a lawyerly fashion, maybe not in the best way to connect with your client? Are you turned away and typing into a computer the whole time? This isn't really the best approach. We would suggest, maybe sitting alongside the client or kind of at a corner together so you're more on equal footing, even in the physical space of the place where you're meeting. And I always like to handwrite, I have to say. I mean, that's, I know, that's just me, but I do find that being able to handwrite notes and then I'll type them up later, I think sometimes makes things a little easier to connect with a client.
Oh, thanks, Layla.
Thanks, Layla. We're seeing some comments come through.
We're almost done, Layla.
Almost done. Yeah, no, everyone's been very patient. So next we're going to turn to what to do if a client is triggered. So if a client is triggered and begins to, there's so many ways that this could manifest, Jessica, just off the top of your head, shaking or spacing out or beginning to cry or, again, even just a seeming sense of detachment where they're not listening to you anymore. There are things that you can do to respond to help bring the client back to the present moment and help them cope with the emotions and experiences that they're having. So what you can do first is just notice and validate the survivor's feelings. And this is where engaging in active listening is so critical. You can make eye contact, nod, say things like, oh, that sounds really scary, really hurtful or stressful. Just repeating back to them and acknowledging what they're experiencing is a crucial bonding moment with the person you're working with. And then you can also provide some basic psychoeducation about trauma responses. never underestimate the power of you as an attorney telling the client that they're not crazy, they're not wrong, they're not overreacting. That can be so validating to hear. If a client begins to exhibit signs of trauma or react to a trigger, you can ask, what would help? Would you like to have a moment to yourself, have a bathroom break? If somebody's with them that's a trusted, confidant or person, do you want to visit with your sister in the waiting room? Just offer those. Don't wait for a client to ask.
And that is really helpful because you are acknowledging that they are the expert on how to calm themselves down.
Exactly.
And that goes back to that client control and building that sense of empowerment and control back into them.
Exactly. Giving that agency is crucial. Help them get grounded in the present too. And Jessica has a great line that she uses.
Yeah.
Again, it's so simple, but saying something, a compliment, like, I like your shoes, are they comfortable? Or talking about something completely unrelated to the situation that's happening can sometimes help bring people back to the present, get their mind off of the symptoms that they're feeling, and really ground them for being able to move on with further discussion.
My analogy is at that moment, if nobody's driving the bus, you have to help them get back into their bodies.
Exactly. And we have a few more suggestions for things to say. Again, just try to acknowledge what the client might be experiencing. And sometimes, going back to if anyone engages in yoga, just having a practice of focusing on breathing.
It's mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's plain and simple.
Incorporate mindfulness into your law practice. That is definitely never something.
Probably never said that before.
Yeah, I haven't, but you know what? It's good advice.
It works. All right, so we are going to go through, a lot of this is reiterating things. We're not going to spend too much time on this, some do's and don'ts. We're working with survivors. Do understand that trauma manifests itself in many different ways, and there's no right way to be a victim, right? The perception of the way that a victim should behave is on us, not on the client, right? And so you shouldn't be the one making that judgment. Understand that structural forms of oppression, poverty, racism, transphobia can be as deeply traumatizing as a traumatic event. And that may impact the client's behavior with you. Someone like walk into a room with me with a white middle-class woman who's never experienced the types of challenges that my clients have. I have to understand that there may be a bit of a barrier until I can prove to them that I understand that trauma is more complex than just the event that they experience. This is a big one for me in the trafficking world. Remember that the survivors experience, I think we probably should have taken trafficking out, but remember that the survivors' trauma experience may not be the most painful thing in their lives, right? So if somebody's coming to you because they're dealing with I'll just use it as an example, with a trafficking experience. Yeah, that may be traumatizing, but maybe the not being believed when they reported being abused as an 8-year-old was actually more traumatic. And again, it's about not putting your assumptions about the way your client should be behaving onto your client. Let them define their lives, essentially. Pay close attention to the phrasing of your questions. We probably should put out a tip sheet on this a little bit, because it's a little bit bigger than just this.
Yes.
But there are ways to phrase your question that, are less judgmental, that don't have judgments built into them. And what I always encourage my students to do is read over or have someone else read over the questions that I plan to ask or that they plan to ask and think about how they would feel as the client in the moment. So the phrasing of your questions can make a big difference. And maintain healthy boundaries. I'm going to skip this for now because we're going to end on some issues around taking care of yourselves. But maintaining healthy boundaries in your work-life balance is really critical in this work.
Moving on to the don'ts. This first one is, again, pretty basic. As Jessica likes to say, don't clutch your pearls in horror at what the client is sharing with you, because you don't want that to damage your relationship or, again, put up a barrier to your working together. Also, and I think this is a really important point. This is
crucial. Don't
ask questions you don't have a legal basis for. Think about, does this information really need to get found out or pried into a minute detail if it's not necessary for the legal case? Probably not. This isn't a TV drama that we're watching. This is somebody's experience and story, and we want to respect their boundaries as well. Try not to label the survivor, pathologize their experience. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory. We also, and this is another critical point, we also want to, don't want to assume the survivor views their trafficker or their abuser negatively, or that the survivor's traumatic experience was entirely negative. Survivors can often have very complex relationships with their abusers. It could have been a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, a parent. The survivor could have been supported and protected in certain really important ways during that relationship, and automatically assuming that the trafficker was wholly bad or using language like evil or something extremely pejorative isn't going to help things, especially as you're trying to construct their story and dive more deeply into their experience. Again, don't behave or use language in any way that reinforces the survivor's shame. Don't say things like, "How could you have let this happen to you?" or, react in horror. Again, we want to be supportive. We don't want to be putting up barriers to us working with someone who's experienced trauma. And again, as noted, survivors are on a journey of recovery and they have lots of challenges. So we don't want to be chastising people. We want to meet them where they're at and go forward from there.
A couple of quick case strategies that you might want to consider. To the extent that you're able, consider using social workers, mitigation specialists, and experts to construct a client story. I have this ongoing fantasy of having a partnership or being able to hire a social worker to help with all of our cases. Because, again, the point of this training is not for you to become the social worker. It's for you to be a better lawyer. But to be able to use someone whose expertise is in this area would be incredibly helpful in a case. Address those common victim blaming narratives. It doesn't matter what she was wearing. It doesn't matter how late he was out. It doesn't matter that he agreed to take on this work before. It doesn't matter that she married him. All of those things. Address those victim blaming narratives either in some form of in your motions or in your advocacy in front of the courtroom. Really focus on humanizing your client by allowing courtroom actors to see, hear, sense, and feel the client's traumatic experience. That's why that the brain diagram I think you find so powerful.
I do find
because it's like
so
you
powerful.
learn all the things and then you see the thing.
And it's irrefutable then. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you are looking at physical evidence of what we're trying to tell a court about.
Right. And then to right along those lines, help those courtroom actors understand that trauma has real, measurable neuropsychological consequences. You are the interpreter. And then again, my favorite thing, educate that substance abuse is not a character flaw, but often an attempt to self-medicate trauma symptoms and other mental health concerns. Now, I always end with this because I would not be a good social worker if I didn't talk about vicarious trauma. Okay, now this is about the trauma that an attorney working with someone who's experienced trauma might experience. So it stems from exposure to the pain, fear, and trauma of others, and it is different from burnout. Burnout involves too many cases, not enough support. Now, those things can be traumatizing, but
different kind of trauma.
It's very different. We're talking about the trauma that comes from hearing the stories of your clients. And I can tell you this is something that I have to be on high alert for, having nearly 20 years of listening, quite frankly, to the stuff of nightmares.
I am in the same boat.
And it's important to recognize that the symptoms that you might experience might mirror those of your traumatized clients. You might become more exhausted, more angry, more irritable. Your interpersonal relationships may be impacted. Your job performance may be impacted. You also may find yourself avoiding work with traumatized clients. I remember the first time I realized this, I was a social worker, and there was one client that when I would see her number come up, I wouldn't answer. And I had to kind of figure out how to work through it and address it. Exactly. And then unfortunately, if things go on without intervention, you may find that your personal values and beliefs may be impacted. You may develop feelings of apathy, detachment, or hopelessness. And at worst, your worldview and your sense of purpose may be compromised. And we don't use this to be like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but we do want you to know that it can get that bad. And so prioritizing your self-care has to be a part of the work in the same way that any other lawyering part is.
Exactly. And with that, we are ready to end our presentation. I think we just want to leave you with what I think is a really profound quote. that talks about really what traumatic experiences do to a person. And I think it ends with a really critical note about how we should respond to people that have experienced trauma. And that's this idea that trauma responses are by and large a normal response to abnormal events. I want everyone who's watching this to take a sticky note and write that down and put it on their computer, because this is something that I think is really affirming that you can share with a client.
I say it pretty much consistently to every client. You are, and this is what I would put on this is a little too much to put on the Post-it note, but I would put on the Post-it note, you are having a perfectly normal response to an abnormal event.
Exactly.
It really can change the game.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. We hope this helps you improve your practice. And we do have a post-webinar survey that we would appreciate your filling out so that we can do what we can to improve. Otherwise, we appreciate your interest in this issue and in trying to improve your own practice. And if you'd like some more information about the work that we're doing at the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, or about working with traumatized clients in general, please feel free to reach out to either Jessica or myself. And again, thank you so much for your time and your attention.
And we'll see you at Taste of Pro Bono on April 9th.
Exactly. We do have a number of upcoming trainings as well that I just wanted to mention around divorce, custody, taxes, debt relief, and you can find information about all of those trainings as well as a Taste for Pro Bono on the MVLS website, MVLSLAW, MVLSlaw.org. Thank you so much.